Good day. I am Myron Thompson, a federal judge in Montgomery, Alabama. I have been asked to discuss with you the legal concept of the rule of law. I put together some notes to help me to keep me on point. These notes right here. When you first encounter the concept of rule of law, it might sound not particularly exciting or relevant to you. It might seem like a purely theoretical or abstract concept detached from sort of your everyday concerns such as homework or college, getting your driver's license. But the truth is, the rule of law isn't just an idea. It affects almost every aspect of our lives. First of all, as to the law, this country is paved with laws from coast to coast, north and south, east and west, and our lives are regulated by laws from the moment we wake up until the moment we go to sleep. As students, laws get you up in the morning, for they require that you go to school. They get you out of bed so that you can make it to school on time. And that's regardless as to whether you go to a private school or a public school or you're schooled at home. It makes no difference. Laws regulate what you eat for breakfast, for our foods are regulated by laws. They tell you how we are to get to school, what vehicles we are allowed, what roads we can use, and how fast we can go. Laws are just everywhere, everywhere. But at the heart of these laws is this principle known as the rule of law. And as I said, this rule, as do all laws, affect almost every aspect of our lives. Now, how so? Let's break it down. We start with the basic principle of the rule of law, that all people, institutions, entities must be accountable to the same rules. Those rules must be publicly known, equally enforced, and independently adjudicated. Simply put, that's what we mean when we say the rule of law. We can start with something simple like speed limits. When you get your license, you have to follow the same rules as every other driver on the road. In other words, the laws are equally enforced. But what if you feel like that isn't true? What if you think that young drivers or drivers from certain neighborhoods are pulled over more often? Like some people are allowed to speed and some aren't. If so, that's the failure of the rule of law, and one might feel personally invested in it. But if you're driving on safe roads where people are generally obeying the rules and everyone is basically treated the same, that's no coincidence. This system of speed limits, licenses, and alcohol laws that work in combination to keep you and your friends and loved ones safe on the road every time you get in a car, that is a product of the rule of law. Now, let's talk about the rule of law on the internet. You're familiar with the concepts of free speech. You may feel strongly about your right to say whatever you want to on social media, like what? Instagram or TikTok. Maybe you think you should be allowed to complain about your teachers or a classmate who's getting on your nerves or someone you think who's cheating. That's all fine. But now think about it from the other perspective. What if someone made a post complaining about you? What if their post accused you of doing something that just wasn't true? Spreading an embarrassing rumor or even accusing you of a crime. Now imagine that post goes what we call, viral? That thousands and hundreds of thousands of people all across the nation, let alone in your own school and your state, could be watching this video of you that's been taken out of context. And that's really just not true. What rights do you have? Can you make other persons delete their comments? Would you require the platform to have any responsibility to protect you? There aren't simple answers to these questions. In fact, they are being debated right now in the courts across the country. Some people think platforms regulate speech too much, that people have an absolute right to free speech, including across social media, on Instagram and TikTok. Others think they don't regulate enough, and that users deserve more protection and privacy. These debates are at the very heart of the rule of law. People trying to create a system that treats everyone equally with the same rights with clear rules. Maybe you want to help create a change of those rules. Maybe you just want to keep posting on Instagram. Either way, your life is being shaped by the law, and in particular by the rule of law. Let's look at another example, guns. Many people have very strong opinions about gun laws in this country, especially when it comes to questions like a person's right to have a gun, or even the presence of guns in schools. What regulations can the government create? What regulations should the government create? Gun laws affect individuals. Many people are in prison for having a firearm illegally or for crimes involving guns. And gun laws also affect whole systems of permits and regulations, how guns are and are not restricted in your city and in your state. Maybe you like the system as it is. Maybe you think that laws should be stricter or more relaxed. Maybe you have concerns that laws aren't equally enforced. Those are all questions about the rule of law. And your perspective is necessary and valuable. I want to end by reminding you about what happens when the rule of law fails. Between the Civil War and World War II, thousands of Black people were lynched across the United States. These lynchings were violent, public acts of murder that terrorized entire communities and left an indelible stain on our country's history. The rule of law failed because the victims of lynchings were murdered by frenzied crowds. The victims had no rights, and the mobs obeyed no rules. But the rule of law also failed every single time that state and federal officials looked the other way. The white people who perpetrated lynchings thought the color of their skin and the color of their victims meant they could do basically whatever they want. They were never held accountable for their brutality. And very often they were right. There was no accountability, no equal treatment. That horrific period in our country's history is just one testament, one example to the violence that occurs when there is no rule of law. When you look around the world today, you might feel powerless or disheartened. You might think that these systems are set in stone, like the rule of law has nothing to do with you, like these concepts are too complicated and abstract for you to get involved. But that just isn't true. Laws are constantly evolving and changing in response to people, including students like you, using your voice. If you want to shape the way the laws work, the way people are held accountable, what kinds of actions are allowed, and what kinds of actions are criminalized, then you have to get involved. You have to be engaged. Be willing to ask hard questions. Listen to new perspectives. You don't have to solve every problem in the world, but keep asking questions about the rule of law in your community, in your state, and even in this country. You have to stay engaged. We all work together to create these rules, to figure out how we're going to live by them. The rule of law is an ongoing project, one that will work as we all work together every day.
Good morning. I'm Spud Sill, a local practicing attorney here in Montgomery, Alabama, and we're here today for the 2023 Law Day video. With me this morning is Judge Keith Watkins, one of the senior status judge here in the Middle District, and another local practicing lawyer, Jordan Jenkins. We're going to ask Judge Watkins some questions regarding the Law Day celebration. Judge Watkins, can you give a brief description of the role of law and the rule of law?
Sure. I'll start with the rule of law. You've heard it said, and I know students are watching this have heard it said, that the United States is a melting pot of cultures and languages, hundreds of languages and thousands of cultures. Of course, like Spanish language, there are a lot of different cultures in the Spanish language. So we're a melting pot, and I want to say, what is the pot? What is the hard thing that really can't change, or it can't change much, for us to have a civil society? And in my view, the pot and the melting pot is the rule of law. The rule of law is the hard thing. It's the thing that can't be changed very easily. It's the thing that everybody in the pot has agreed to. So if you use salad or soup, some other metaphors, it's what we've all agreed to, and it holds us together. Now, having said that, the rule of law is not entirely inflexible. One of the understandings of the United States law is that we, judges and jurors and lawyers, have to follow the law whether we agree with it or not. And I'm forever writing opinions, which I do a lot of, that come to conclusions that I wish the law were different, that I don't agree with this law. Now, most of my opinions, I do agree with the law. Well, there's some that I don't. And in criminal cases, I try cases, there's some rules of evidence I don't agree with. But I'm stuck with them because we follow the rule of law. It's the hard thing. It's the pot. It's the thing that keeps us together. Now, it can be changed, but it's not easy to change. And occasionally courts change it, but ordinarily legislators change it. And sometimes the Supreme Court, of course, will change it. That's the rule of law. The role of law is to have a fair and just application of the rule of law. It's like playing a baseball game. If you played a baseball game with no rules, there'd be fights, disputes. Nobody would know how to keep score. You didn't know whether you run the bases third, second, and first, or first, second, and third. I mean, you couldn't play baseball without the rules, and there has to be a referee or an umpire. And so in our system, the role of law is to see to it that the rule of law is applied justly and fairly, and that ordinarily, as we've consented in our culture, in our civilization, we have consented to judges, magistrates, umpires, referees, arbitrators, and mediators to help us settle our disputes when we can't settle them ourselves, so that that's the role of law, to be sure that the rule of law is fairly and equally applied.
In your opinion, what is the most important rule of law in the United States?
And this is my opinion, but my opinion is that the First Amendment is the most important rule of law, because if you can't speak and assemble and seek redress from the government, you're not free. Now, we're free in this country because we're bound. It's like a fence around a playground. You put a fence around a playground, the kids will play all that to the edges. Science shows, though, if you take the fence away, the kids stay in the middle of the playground. They don't use the whole playground. And so that fence is our rule of law, and we're free because we've agreed to that. And the playground is much, much bigger in the United States than it is in other countries in law, because we've agreed to be bound by it. So the First Amendment, they say that the writ of habeas corpus is the great writ. I think the First Amendment is the great right. And I think it's so great, I'm going to read it here, if I can do it without my glasses. I've got some. Congress shall make no law, and how that came to be more than Congress is a thought for another day. Congress shall make no law restricting an establishment of religion, that's the Establishment Clause, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, that's a Free Exercise Clause, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. That's what we do in court. In civil court, the citizens come into the courthouse and they seek redress with a referee or a judge or a magistrate to resolve their disputes, to be redressed for whatever harm they've suffered. Now, it can happen that happens in the street sometimes, but it's not supposed to happen in the street here because these courthouse doors are always open. My view is that the doors to a courthouse are open until they're closed for some reason. A lot of people have the idea that they're closed and you have to pry them open. No, our citizens have a right to seek redress. And in this court, we have a lot of citizens who come here without lawyers seeking redress on their own because they have the right to do it under the First Amendment. And without the First Amendment, I don't think we would be free.
Judge Watkins, why is it important to understand how civility participates in the cornerstone of democracy?
Okay, well, civility comes from civilization. Civic comes from civilization. Civilized comes from civilization. A civilized people have to adopt some kind of a consented way to get along, and by consent. And part of it is being civil in the court system. In fact, we have two kinds of cases in court. We have criminal cases, and we have civil cases. And those civil cases is a mechanism in a civil society to have a civil trial, play by the rules, get a fair, you may not agree with it, but get a fair settlement of whatever your dispute was. A wise lawyer told me the day I took this job that a party will remember being mistreated long after they've forgotten being ruled against. We have to remember this is the people's court, and that people have a right to be here. Because if you don't give them that right, then they're not going to be as civil. They're going to take it to the streets. And then you have a loss of civility. Now, in Alabama, unfortunately, we have a long history of civil rights litigation. And I know the students will be familiar with the Rosa Parks case, but the Rosa Parks case, which the actual case was called Browder versus Gale, tried right here in this room. That case started in 1896 when the Supreme Court ruled in Plessy versus Ferguson that you could have separate but equal treatment of people of different races. As long as it was equal, it could be separate. Well, pretty quickly, people being people, they forgot about the equal part and made the separate part the big thing. In 1954, the Supreme Court had to repair the pot. The rule of law had gotten out of whack. And so in the Brown versus Board of Education, the Supreme Court ruled that we had to offer an equal education, could not discriminate on the basis of race in the area of education. That's 54. 1955, Rosa Parks took a stand, and because the Montgomery bus ordinance said that a black person had to give up their seat to a white person if they were requested to do so, and she didn't do it, she was arrested. That was a crime in those days. So the rule of law had gotten out of sync. So we've got this Brown versus Board in 1954. She's on appeal in 1956 for a December 1, 55 arrest. And in this court, Browder versus Gale was decided, and it's the first time that the Brown versus Board of Education 1954 was applied outside of education in the transportation realm. And Judge Frank Johnson and two other judges, another one, Judge Reeves from Montgomery, and then a judge from Birmingham, 2-1 ruled that the bus ordinance in Montgomery was unconstitutional because it treated people of a different race discriminated against them on the basis of their color of their skin. That started an entire revolution in Montgomery, but it was a peaceable revolution by and large, at least for the people who were trying to get their rights secured. It was peaceable. It was a bus boycott that went along with that. It was very effective. But when the U.S. Supreme Court upheld Browder versus Gale, the judges and the law began to change. It took a long time for Alabama to become reconstructed after that, but eventually we did, and mostly in a civil manner. The idea was to keep things in here so that things on the street don't happen. Same thing with the Selma March. Judge Johnson didn't want anybody blocking the U.S. highway, but he ruled that you can go 2 by 2 and do it in an orderly fashion. You're not blocking the whole highway. So he balanced that out. So that's a way to maintain civility, because what happened on Bloody Sunday was not civil. The marchers came across the bridge, troopers and men on horses, possemen and others, beat them back. And so that was not civil. Judge Johnson, right up here, made sure that civility ruled, and he did it here in a civil setting. That was not a criminal case. That was a civil case. So civility is a cornerstone of democracy, and this room is evidence of it.
Judge Watkins, we thank you so much for your time and your comments today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Spud Sill, a local attorney here in Montgomery, Alabama, and we're here for the 2023 Law Day video. With me this morning is Judge Emily Marks, the presiding judge for the Middle District of Alabama, and another local lawyer, Jordan Jenkins. And we're going to ask Judge Marks some questions with regard to Law Day. And I'm going to start off. Judge Marks, can you give a brief description of the rule of law and the role of law?
Sure. The rule of law is, generally speaking, an agreement among citizens to act and comport in a certain way that takes into consideration other people. We like to enjoy our own freedom, but in order to truly live freely, we do have to live by rules. It necessarily involves taking into consideration not infringing on the rights of other people. And in order to ensure that we live in such a way that we do not infringe on the rights of others, we need to have rules or laws that everyone agrees we will follow, even if we don't agree with a law, because we enjoy the benefits of those laws. We also have the attendant responsibility to follow them. The role of law in our society is to ensure that we all live freely to the extent possible while recognizing the rights of other people. And in that, it necessarily takes into consideration a general understanding that it's important to take other people into consideration and treating them the way you would want to be treated.
The theme of Law Day this year is Cornerstones of Democracy, Civics, Civility, and Collaboration. What role does civics play in our democracy, and how is it connected to the rule of law?
Well, civics, I think of civics as your civic engagement, and that necessarily, I think, involves both civility and collaboration. They all go hand in hand, and that is this overall theme of being engaged in not only what your own self-interest is, but also the interest of the community you live in and the rights of other people. That necessarily means working with other people, even if they don't agree with everything you think, and learning to get along with other people who may not be like you, and understanding that it is only through working together that we can have a community in which everyone can live the way that they want to live.
You asked to follow up.
And I think you did a good job in your response kind of doing this, but can you give us some other examples of how the rule or the role of law is applied in these three cornerstones of civics, civility, and collaboration?
Yes, people generally like to organize themselves in particular ways, and that is where the rule of law comes into play. If you have expectations of other people, we're generally open to acting within those parameters. When you are living in a society where you want to do what you can to pursue your own happiness in your own life. In order to do that, you have to address the tensions that exist when people think differently. But the tensions of people thinking and living differently is also what really makes our society great, is that you cannot grow and expand your own way of thinking unless you are exposed to people who think differently from you. You can always learn something from people who think differently than you do. And then if you're surrounded by people who don't challenge your way of thinking, you necessarily can't grow and change yourself. And it's that growth that will make a community robust. It facilitates the ideas of coming up with ways in which we can improve upon what we currently have, and we are able to move forward and come up with ideas about governing ourselves or ways in which we can improve the lives of other people through developing. For example, in Montgomery, we have a baseball team now. We didn't have that when I was growing up. It's a really fun way for people to go out and enjoy things with their families. Somebody had to come up with that idea. Somebody had to present it to other people. Property needed to be purchased. A building had to be constructed. We had to recruit members to come and play baseball for us. All of those things required thinking, coming up with the idea, actually making it happen, signing contracts, recruiting players who are talented at sports, and it enhanced the community. That required thinking about civic engagement, thinking about collaborating and working together, and it enhanced our community. That is the way that we can grow as a city, as a county, in the state. And it's, if you don't have people who push you to come up with different ideas like that, it becomes stagnant. You become a stagnant community.
Judge Marks, how do you think civics, civility, and collaboration are cornerstones of democracy?
Well, I think that is sort of baked into the example of coming up with ways in which we can grow and change. I think that when people work together and are able to accept perhaps a way that I view an issue is not the only view that's worthy of consideration. I'm going to listen to somebody, even if I disagree with that person. There's something I can get from that. I might not agree with them, but I think you told me one time, Spud, no matter how thinly you slice a pancake, it always has two sides. I've never forgotten that you said that, and I thought,
favorite saying.
that is true. That is true. So even if you think, really, I don't agree with what this person says, or I think this is a terrible idea, there's something you can learn from it. Even if it's an example of what you don't want to be like, or something that you don't want to do. You have to have a love of your community and caring about other people for you to really get involved in civic engagement. You have to be willing to compromise and collaborate with other people, but you also have to treat other people the way you want to be treated, because if you don't treat other people in a civil way, I just don't think you're persuasive. I think that the best way to collaborate with other people is to hear them, to consider their thoughts, debate the good and bad of each of your sides, and that is the way that we come up with ideas that can actually work and benefit the greater good.
And of those three cornerstones that you just described, which do you think is the most important for our system of government and our nation?
I think the only way any of that works is you have to have civility. The others generally, I think, grow from civility. But if you don't treat other people the way you want to be treated, and you act in such a way that disregards other people's thoughts or points of view, all of the other things collapse. If you don't have a basic, really just consideration for someone who may live differently, have a different background, come from a different point of view, and you want everyone to adapt to your way of thinking, that will not ultimately result in any positive outcomes. And really, when you think about it, it can be something as simple as, I was thinking the other day, I was driving down the road and I saw a car wanted to merge in. So I stopped and I let that car merge in. They gave me the thank you wave and I felt really good. And I thought, I did that because I've been in their position before. And I've thought, somebody just let me in. I don't understand why everybody's driving past. They're not even looking at me. Just be a good citizen. And it compelled me in that moment to see that car and think, if I were them, I would want somebody to stop and let them in. So I'm going to let them in. That is a basic way of looking at general civility, doing something for someone else that you would really want them to do for you. And that's a very minute thing. But if you do it in everything you do, whether it's professional, personal, or just a little everyday action like that, it really, it just facilitates a community feeling that makes your environment a more pleasant environment. And when you do things like that as a matter of course in your regular day, it changes you. I think that you become the things you do. And if you act in a way where you try to make a deliberate decision to do nice things for other people, even when it might not benefit you, if all of us do that, you can really alter the community you live in and your general experience.
Why is it important to understand how both the rule of law and the role of law participate in the cornerstones of democracy?
Well, if you don't have rules, you'll have chaos. I think unless you have general expectations for people, they won't know what's permitted and they won't know how to act. In a school setting, if you don't have a rule that when the bell rings, you know you need to be in your desk, kids will wander the hallway. Teachers won't be able to find people. You can't get your schoolwork done. So you have to have rules that people, or expectations that people understand. The role of law is not only that we understand what we're supposed to do, we understand what the rules are and how we're supposed to comport ourselves. If you have people who won't follow them, and they won't buy into the role of law in our lives, we also have chaos. So if you have a rule, kids have to be in their desk when the bell rings, but it's not enforced, and kids don't pay attention to it. The students who say, I have to be in my desk when the bell rings so that we can move along with class, if half of the class says, I'm not buying into that, they can't tell me what to do, I'm not going to be in my desk when the bell rings, you can't have a class. You can't have a substantive class. The teacher doesn't have control over the classroom. The kids who are refusing to accept the role of law in their school classroom setting have created now a problem for those kids who are willing to follow the rules, and now they don't get the academic benefits of being in the classroom. It's the same way with speeding in a car. The rule of law says you can't exceed the speed limit. The role of law is everybody has agreed to follow that rule. And when people don't follow that rule, bad things happen. You can get into a car accident. You make it unsafe for other people to be on the roadway. We accept green light means go, red light means stop. If you say, I'm not going to follow that rule, people will get hurt. And so the rules are the rules. They give special guidelines for people to understand what's expected of them. But the role of that is, I'm going to act in a certain way. I'm going to stop at the red light because I know other people need to have an opportunity to go, even if I'm late, even if I really want to move forward. Because if I've got the green light, I expect somebody else to stop. For me, that's the general accepting of the role of law in our lives, is that I'm going to get the benefit of that rule or that law, but I also have the responsibility to follow it. And if either of those two pieces don't work, again, we will have a community of chaos.
Judge March, we thank you for your time and your comments.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.